climate change, previously known as global warming, previously known as global cooling, is a scam designed to exploit money from the West. It was previously labeled an unpopular conspiracy theory, until they found a way to tax it. Suddenly, politicians around the world jumped on board to promote the scam and tax everyone. According to the conspiracy, mankind has been producing way too much carbon dioxide emissions, which is changing the climate, which is being covered up by the fossil fuel industry. Not only that, everyday people are responsible for carbon dioxide emissions, from driving their cars to simply breathing. This is known as their carbon footprint, which the government taxes. The carbon tax is intended to siphon money from carbon dioxide emitters, and distribute that money to put an end to carbon dioxide emissions. The carbon tax, however, doesn't tax everyone evenly. The developed world, the West, is taxed heavily, while developing countries like China, who produce significant emissions and are now by far the world's biggest emitter, contributing 30% of the world's emissions, do not suffer from such a harsh tax because they are still developing. To make it worse, the West supplies developed resources to the rest of the world, which they alone are taxed over. The carbon tax punishes the West, and rewards the rest of the world. All the money put into the carbon tax gets sent to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and then the money disappears. Not a cent goes into researching new power alternatives, or doing anything to actually stop carbon dioxide emissions. They just tax it and run off with the money. In the climate change scam, there is what's known as the hockey stick graph. They produce a graph of the global average temperature over time, and right at the end they show a slight jump in temperature, which they attribute to mankind without evidence. Then they go on to make a prediction based on that jump, and expand it high up into the sky, so that the little jump is shaped like a hockey stick. Their predictions, however, are absolute nonsense. They use computer models to predict the climate, but their models have never once been correct. They have made thousands of attempts at new models, and they all miserably fail. But that doesn't stop them from promoting doomsday scenarios and calling it science. Their models have been so wrong for so long, that few people buy into the climate change story anymore. But it's too late, since the West is already under the oppressive carbon tax. With the carbon tax and the West being forced to use alternative energy, one might ask how much of a difference it will make. Well, according to their computer models, almost no difference at all. According to the IPCC, we're doomed and it's too late already. But that doesn't stop them from taxing us anyway. They call it climate change nowadays, because it was previously called global warming. The problem is, their predictions of global warming were all wrong. The temperature in many places has lowered. Antarctic ice has in fact grown. So what they say now is that the climate is changing. Every time there's a storm, they point to man-made climate change. It was originally called global cooling. There is no evidence behind their claims, but that doesn't stop them from fraudulently conjuring it up. And those fraudulent statistics are blindly copied by the government. One trick they do is make predictions, and add it to a graph. The graph will show a sharp rise in temperature and show our carbon dioxide emissions. But what they don't tell you is that the highlighted part that shows the rise, which is usually in red, isn't an actual rise in temperature but a prediction. So they make up graphs with sudden climate changes, out of thin air, and call it science. The IPCC first came out saying they had a scientific consensus that climate change, which was global warming back then, is caused by man. They brought forward 2,500 signatures from scientists to back up their claim. But those signatures were based on a lie. The scientists, many of which were not climate scientists, simply agreed that the Earth was warming, without saying it was man-made. It was known even back then, that the sun was heating up. That had an effect on the whole solar system. Storms were appearing on Jupiter and Venus. and the polar caps on Mars melted, and none of that was man-made. And then, the Earth began to cool. So many of the scientists who gave their signature wanted their signature removed since it was given under false pretenses. 30,000 scientists signed a document that stated global warming was not caused by man, and they attempted to sue the IPCC. The IPCC has a long and troubled history. Examples of this are in the IPCC leadership changes over time. Many of the leaders have quit in protest against the IPCC and their pseudoscience. Many dissenting staff have left over the years also. Christopher Lancia quit over the IPCC being politicized and of his concerns about the IPCC leadership being dismissed. Paul Ryder quit over fake experts and fake science. Richard Lindzen quit over exaggerated reports and the deliberate misrepresentation of data. John Everett quit over fake science and made a website critical of the IPCC. Tom Siegelstedt quit and also made a website critical of the IPCC and its alarmism. Hans von Storch quit over the IPCC presenting disinformation. Roger Pica quit over the IPCC being biased. There are many others who once worked in the IPCC and have become critical of its fake science and religious following. Carbon dioxide is not a pollutant, as climate change supporters would have you believe. It is a harmless building block for life. Plants breathe it in. Due to the increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, forests have regenerated. When it comes to real climate change, pollution is a real factor. But climate change supporters aren't interested in pollution, since they can't tax it any further than it already is. Pollution of many kinds in the non-Western world is a catastrophe. The success of the Western world in controlling pollution is a lesson that modern civilization doesn't need to have a pollution problem. Outside the West, however, civilization fails in many ways, one of which is widespread pollution and a lack of concern for the environment. Very convenient, since these people are not taxed with the carbon tax in the same way the West is. In Japan and China, there are massive smog problems and heavily polluted rivers. In Africa, they throw all their rubbish in the lakes, poisoning their own drinking water. No matter the level of civilization, the non-Western world heavily pollute and poison their environment. And these are the very people who are not oppressed under the climate change tax.